The Life of David Livingston, Part 11. We were not informed of his death until the next day. The burial of a Bechuana chief takes place in his cattle pen, and all the cattle are driven for an hour or two around and over the grave so that it may be quite obliterated. We went and spoke to the people, advising them to keep together and support the heir. They took this kindly, and in turn told us not to be alarmed, for they not think of ascribing the death of their chief to us. That Sebenente had just gone the way of his fathers, and though the father had gone, he had left his children, and they hoped that we would be as friendly to his children as we intended to have been to himself. He was decidedly the best specimen of a native chief I ever met. I never felt so much grieved by the loss of a black man before, and it was impossible not to follow him in thought into the world of which he had just heard before he was called away, and to realize somewhat of the feelings of those who pray for the dead. The deep, dark question of what is to become of such as he must, however, be left where we find it, believing that assuredly the judge of all the earth will do right. Upon the death of this remarkable man, the government of the Makololo devolved upon a daughter named Ma Machosnie. The explorers now had to look to her for permission to traverse the country as they desired. She gave them perfect liberty to visit the part of the country they chose. In the exercise thereof, Mr. Oswell and Dr. Livingston proceeded 135 miles to the northeast to Sesheke, and toward the end of June discovered the Zambezi River in the center of the continent, where it had not been previously known to exist at all. It is a magnificent stream, navigable from the bars inside the delta of the Victoria Falls, discovered by Dr. Livingston, a distance of 940 miles, and above them for nearly 400 miles more. Victoria Falls are about 40 miles from the mouth of the Shobe. Here, the river, about half a mile wide, rushes over a precipice 100 feet in height, and suddenly turning almost at a right angle, flows for some 30 miles between two walls of rock no more than 20 yards apart. Here the river sometimes rises perpendicularly more than 60 feet. The entire length of the river is perhaps about 1,500 miles. The discovery of the Zambezi in central South Africa and the acquaintance formed with Sebenente, and the consequent goodwill of the powerful and numerous Makokolo were the greatest events of the expedition, making it one of the most important which has yet been made by African explorers. As these were the first white men to ever have penetrated this country, they were visited by great numbers of natives. Among the visitors were several who were clothed in stuff which had come from the Portuguese on the west coast. Upon inquiry, it was discovered that these goods had been purchased from a tribe called Mambari for far distant in exchange for boys. The tribe of Makololo had begun the slave trade only in 1850, and then under the great temptation of procuring muskets in exchange for boys. These were always captives, and Dr. Livingston testifies that he never knew of instance in Africa where a parent had sold his own offspring. Unable at this time to procure a healthy location for the site of a missionary station in the Makololo country, Dr. Livingston determined to send his family to England, and himself to undertake a new expedition on this behalf. He accordingly returned with his family, reaching Cape Town in April 1852, and for the first time in 11 years, visiting the scenes of civilization, having placed his family on board a homeward bound ship He at once began preparations for that journey across the continent in two directions which has immortalized his name and added immensity to the world's stock of knowledge. One of the greatest scourges to explorers in South Africa, often mentioned by Livingston, makes an additional illustration of the contradictory character of that continent. While it is summer pretty much everywhere else, inhabited by people who are civilized, it is winter here. The graduations of heat and cold appear to go the wrong way. One would naturally suppose that the immense troops of elephants might overrun the country. They are harmless, but a little insect smaller than a honeybee is so great an enemy to man that it must be utterly destroyed before the country can be cultivated by the agriculturalist or inhabited by people for whom the domestic animals are necessary. This is the tsetse fly, whose bite is certain death to horses, cattle, and other animals, though harmless to man and wild beasts. Dr. Livingston thus describes this fearful pest. A few remarks on the tsetse, or Glossina morticinans, may here be appropriate. It is not much larger than the common housefly, and it is nearly of the same brown color and the same common honeybee as the common honeybee. The after part of the body has 3 or 4 yellow bars across it. The wings project beyond the part considerably, and it is remarkably alert, avoiding most dexterously all attempts to catch it with the hand at a common temperature at common temperatures. In the cool of the mornings and evenings, it is less agile. Its particular buzz, when once heard, can never be forgotten by the traveler whose means of locomotion are domesticated animals, for it is well known that the bite of this poisonous insect is certain death to the ox, horse, or dog. In this journey, though we were not aware of any great number having at any time lighted on our cattle, we lost 43 fine oxen by its bite. We watched the animals carefully and believed that not a score of flies were ever upon them. A most remarkable feature in the bite of the tsetse is its perfect harmlessness in man and wild animals, and even calves, so long as they continue to suck the cow. We never experienced the slightest injury from them ourselves personally, although we lived 2 months in their habitat, which was in the case as sharply defined as many others, for the south bank of the Chobe was infested by them, and the northern bank, where our cattle were placed, only 50 yards distant, contained not a single specimen. This was more remarkable, as we often saw natives carrying over raw meat to the opposite bank with many tsetse settled upon it. The poison does not seem to be injected by the sting or by ova placed beneath the skin, for when one is allowed to feed freely on the hand, it is seen to insert the middle prong of 3 portions, into which the proboscis divides somewhat deeply into the true skin, and then draws it out a little way, and it assumes a crimson color, and the mandibles come into brisk operation. The previously shrunken belly swells out, and if left undisturbed, the fly quietly departs when it is full. A slight itching irritation follows, but not more than the bite of a mosquito. In the ox, the same bite produces no more immediate effects than the man. It does not startle him as the gadfly does, but a few days afterwards the following symptoms are supervene. The eye and nose begin to run. The coat stares as if the animal were cold. A swelling appears under the jaw, and sometimes at the navel, and though the animal continues to graze, emaciation commences, accompanied by a particular flaccidity of muscles, and this proceeds unchecked until, perhaps months afterwards, purging comes on, and the animal, no longer able to graze, perishes in a state of extreme exhaustion. Those which are in a good condition often perish soon after the bite is inflicted, with staggering and blindness, as if the brain were affected by it. Sudden changes of temperature produced by falls of rain seem to hasten the progress of the complaint, but in general the emaciation goes on uninterruptedly for months, and, do what we will, the poor animals perish miserably. When opened, the cellular tissue on the surface of the body beneath the skin is seen to be injected with air, as if a quantity of soap bubbles were scattered over it, or a dishonest, awkward butcher had been trying to make it look fat. The fat is of a greenish yellow color and of an oily consistence. All the muscles are flabby, and the head often so soft that the fingers may be made to meet through it. The lungs and liver partake of the disease. The stomach and bowels are pale and empty. The gallbladder is distended with bile. The mule, ass, and goat enjoy the same immunity from the tessidae as man and game. Many large tribes of the Zambezi can keep no domestic animals except for the goat, in consequence of the scourge existing in their country. Our children were frequently bitten, yet suffered no harm, and we saw around us numbers of zebras, buffaloes, pigs, palaws, and other antelopes feeding quietly in the very habitat of these tessidae, yet as undisturbed by yet as undisturbed by its bite as oxen are when they receive the fatal poison. This insect has been classified by different naturalists as the same as the zimb of Bruce and the zebub in Hebrew. The Marquis of Spinento identifies the zimb with the dog fly of the Greeks, with the flies under different names of other countries, and with the Arab of Scripture, the fly which caused the fourth of the plagues of Egypt. The Portuguese in Africa believed that the tessitae lives only in regions where there are elephants, and that upon the extermination of those animals, the great scourge of the fly will cease. Interesting theory. The Portuguese.